Oh. Grab you. I'm gonna put you right on the floor. There it is. Iron Man. Very cool. My mother says all right, well, I am driving at the moment. Shouldn't be doing this, but you know what? It's okay. I'm gonna turn this music off real quick, or turn it down. We are on a little adventure. We are gonna go and take some photos. I think I'm gonna go up to this little canyon area that I found, and it's gonna be great. I'm taking you along with me, and we're gonna talk about composition and what to really look for when it comes to taking photos and just making a little bit better quality images with composition. So come along with me. Okay, so I've actually been here before. I'm gonna show a photo in just a second, but I got that photo here and I decided, you know what, I wanna come back to this area because it's kind of cool. It's a nice little place and it's a little bit of a hike, so it's a good time to go out right now. It's about springtime almost. I think it's officially spring, but it's quite warm, the sun's out, and figured I would go on a hike, take you guys with me, and let's talk photos and make some good stuff. We'll talk about composition. I'm finally here at this little spot, and I got a drone with me this time, so I can get some footage that I've been interested in getting. And you know, I'm just realizing that I did not bring a tripod with me, so talking about composition might be a little interesting. I won't have a place to really put my camera. Oops, didn't think about that. It's okay, I'll come up with something. But right now, let's just get up to the spot that I want to do this. So it'll be a second. Basically on top of a little hill where you'll be able to see a bunch of things. Also, there's a lot of mud. Whoops. A little bit of a cliff right there. That's fun. So basically we are going up there and try not to fall off of this, but we're gonna fly the drone right through that little canyon and it'll be awesome. I'm a little tired already. I'm not in shape, but the good thing about right now is it's springtime-ish, but it's not warm enough for snakes to come out. So good thing. Here in Utah, pretty dry most of the time. And when it's warm, lots of snakes, especially in these little areas. I don't expect any snakes. If I do, I know what to do. It's fine. Also, I'm remembering all these little places that are quite sketchy. Just don't fall off. So far we parked down there. There's the car, and we've walked around all the way to right here. Let's keep going. We're actually pretty close to where I want to be. Lots of hills. We're basically there. There she is. Okay, so we've made it. And put the camera down. So, composition. The reason why we use composition in photography is to make our photos look better and look more intentional. We have a bunch of different rules. A few of them are positive and negative space. I'm out of breath after walking up here. Positive and negative space, the rule of thirds. We have lines and patterns, and there's quite a few others, which I will just make a little list and to go from there. But first, before we talk about that, let's whip out that drone real quick and let's fly it. I'm kind of excited. Okay, I think that's enough flying for today. That's mainly because I've just run out of battery. I've used all 3. That's okay. We're gonna continue walking through this little area. It gets pretty dark. It's quite heavily forested where I'm going, but that's okay. We'll take some pictures, and next time you see me, we'll be back in our usual spot and we'll go over what I've taken. And I'll also show things I've taken in the past, because sometimes when you go out and shoot photos, you can't get every single photo composition. Sometimes, just depends, but it's all right. Switch hands, nice. Anyway, yeah, we'll see what we can get. And if we don't get everything, then that's all right. We'll show previous stuff that I recorded. Okay, now that we're back in our little area, let's talk about composition. Unfortunately, I could only get a hold of really one photo while I was out there, and it is this one. Now, in this picture, it is a rule of thirds, and it's also a depth photo. In this picture, we have the piece of grass or the little shrub, whatever it is I actually took a picture of. That was framed off just to the side onto one of the thirds. So the rule of thirds is basically where your frame is split up into 3 separate quadrants, both left to right and up and down. And the rule about the rule of thirds is your most interesting items in your photograph should be put on those lines, or more specifically on the crosshairs of those lines. We use the rule of thirds because the brain is very attracted to things that are off center. Things that are crooked are very pleasing to the human eye, which is kind of funny. So now on top of rule of thirds, you also have something called balance. Now balance and rule of thirds are very similar. In the rule of thirds, you can basically isolate an item and put it off to the side, but then it leaves the frame empty. What you can do to fix that is then look for another object in your frame that's on the other side of the main object. So this is balance. So a good example is having something in your foreground off to the side and then a building in the background. Balance just adds a little bit of symmetry and it makes your photo less empty. When we look at photos, our eyes are naturally drawn to lines. Leading lines are something that are used to help guide the viewer to a subject. You can use leading lines to direct where exactly the subject of the photo is. Sometimes leading lines are just there for aesthetic. Leading lines will help us be pulled into where the subject of that photo is. Next, we have symmetry and patterns. Now, it's pretty simple. Symmetry is just where on both sides of the frame, things are very similar. Everything looks basically the same on both sides, just like a sphere or a box. If you have the box right in the middle, it's going to look the same on both sides. Symmetry, basically it. Pretty simple. Now, my personal favorite composition rule to use is something called depth. So in photography, we're working on a 2-dimensional plane. We can turn that 2-dimensional space into a 3-dimensional looking image. When we include depth into our pictures, we get a sense of what is in front and what is in back and what is in the middle, basically giving the viewer the feeling of actually being there. You can control depth by playing around with your aperture and making that iris bigger or smaller depending on how much depth you want, but sometimes having a shallow depth of field isn't always the same. You can get depth just by framing your photos exactly the way you want them to be, showing a background, showing something in the middle, and then something in front. Another composition rule is framing. In a photograph, we have the photo that is the frame itself, the whole photo, and then within that photograph, if you have something that is framed, then this is the rule of framing. So I have a photo right here. This was a picture I took on a university campus where there was some wood that had a hole in it, but I could see through it, and on the other side was the bell tower. So I managed to point the lens right through there and got that picture. This is known as framing, where you're basically surrounding your subject with something else that's also within the frame of a picture. Another thing with composition is mergers. Now, mergers are actually something we want to actually avoid. Mergers include things like tree branches sticking out of people's heads and things basically blending into the foreground. This can be color, this can be texture, this can be a lot of things. Avoiding mergers will also give you a better sense of depth within a photo. You'll be able to tell what is in front and what is back a lot easier when you're not merging the foreground and the background. We also have something called positive and negative space. So that's a pretty easy one. You have basically whatever you have as your subject, and then the background is very plain. Positive and negative space, as well as minimalism, are very, very closely tied together, because minimalism is basically where there's not a lot that's actually going on within the frame. You kind of just have your one subject and that's it. Same thing with positive and negative space. You have your background, which can be your negative, and then you have your foreground be that positive space. You're basically isolating a subject, not with depth, but just with the background. And honestly, the very last one would be experimentation. The great thing about photography is you don't always have to stick to these specific rules. You can be experimental about it, and you can create images and make them your own and do something that you can consider different weird. In photography, it is an art. You are able to create whatever kind of art you would like. You don't always have to stick with composition rules, but they are there to help guide you, especially when learning. So that's it for this video. That was on composition, pretty basic. I will say there are a lot more composition rules that you can go over. I didn't go over everything. I mentioned a few of the most popular ones that you can use, but there are more. Feel free to look them up though and learn a little bit more. I think personally, the more composition you know, the better off you are as a photographer, and you'll be a little bit more flexible in your environment because you know what it is to look for when using certain composition rules. Hit that like button, smash it, subscribe, stay creative, and I will see you guys in the next video.